Well, Mike, always good to see you. You're a beacon of warmth and positivity in an uncertain world.
Oh, wow. Thanks, Bobby. I love seeing you too. I miss you. Miss you around these parts.
Yep, it's been a little while since I've been to Ithaca, but we were going to go in March for the Thaw Festival, but that was the first thing that actually was cut from all this.
Oh.
It's kind of I spent my whole winter basically booking a series of shows that were about to start. I was killing myself to try to organize these runs, upstate and whatever. And then just in time for the shows, everything got cut.
If it makes you feel any better, it really hasn't thawed around here. Catherine and I just took a walk like half an hour ago, and it started snowing again.
Ugh. That's why I had to get out of Ithaca, man, as soon as I could. That's more than I can handle. That's too much psychological turmoil for me, I think, to
What's
swing.
Today? It says May 12th. Yeah, so it's snowing on May 12th.
Yeah, if I saw snow outside, man, I'd start to repent pretty quick. All of a sudden, I'm looking at there's a little too much chaos in the world for like a normal, a normal.
Oh, come on, you wouldn't actually repent. There's no repentance for you.
I don't know. We'll see. We would see. I gotta have a breaking point. All right. Well, the theme here is loosely jazz education in an age of turmoil, mild turmoil. But we'll start off with good stuff, and we'll maybe ease our way there briefly. So you have had a particularly interesting path from saxophonist to real guy job, normal job, and then back to jazz education.
That's true. Yeah,
Where did
circuitous.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There you go. Where did you? What was the beginning of your? Let's say you started off in school playing saxophone. What was the beginning of your musical career?
Whew. That's a. I mean, do you want to count like little gigs that I did in high school?
Well, what got you into it in the first place?
You know what's funny is I have a journal that I was required to keep in first grade. And in my first grade journal, I used to write, I remember the teacher, still remember her name, Mrs. Rieger. Mrs. Rieger would put on the board a prompt, my favorite animal is, and then you'd have to finish it and color it in our little book. I still have this book, and I talked about music a lot.
Wow.
I had records, I had Beatles, I had Bay City Rollers, I loved music. I had a reel-to-reel tape recorder that I used to love to play with. I had more than one. I feel like I would go through them because I would just wear them out. I would record stuff off the radio, and I would record my own voice, and so I really got into that big time as a kid and loved playing saxophone. I played saxophone in fifth grade, I think, is when I started playing saxophone. At the same time, I also got into computers, and that was the diversion that you talked about before. Is that when I needed a regular guy job, I had these computer skills that I was able to brush up and get back up and running again. But yeah, it was in high school that I really started taking music seriously. I studied with some great people because I grew up in Rochester. There were great saxophonists around all the time that I got to study with. Brian Scanlon, who's now in the West Coast, he plays in Gordon Goodwin's band, was my saxophone teacher, I think, in 8th grade. And he was phenomenal. I love telling stories about him because he was such a great teacher, and he's a phenomenal player, too.
Let me ask you as a quick aside here.
Yeah.
What is it? Is there something that you can do to summarize his attitude or maybe the techniques that he used that were particularly influential?
I could tell. You want me to tell you my favorite story about Brian?
I absolutely do.
Okay, so we had a jazz band in my middle school. Don Coley was our music teacher. We had a jazz band, and I asked him if I could play Barry. So I was playing Barry in this, in 7th grade band or 8th grade band. And I remember we had a tune. I'm not going to remember what it was called, but what I remember was that it was like. And I don't know what happened after that. I just remember that part because I had the Barry part. I feel like I actually went ba 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 ba, and low D on Barry, and I just loved it. And I went to Brian and I said, I'm trying to figure out this chord. I can't figure out what it is. And I said, the way I described it to him was that it sounded minor and major at the same time. And he said, that's interesting. So let's see if we can figure out what that chord is. And so he goes to the piano and he plays. And I said, no, I don't think that's the chord. And he said, oh, well, did you get your pencil and your notebook paper and write this down? And I was like, okay. And he said, that's a major seventh chord. I said, okay. I'll write that down. And I said, but that's not the one. He said, I know. Just write it down anyways. Okay. And then he played this. I said, oh, that's not it either. He said, I know. Write down minor seventh. And he went through this for about 5 minutes, giving me all these different chords. And at the end, he finally played, that's the wrong chord. And I said, oh, that's it. That's the chord. And he said, I know that's the one you wanted. I had to teach you all these other chords first.
Sure.
So in retrospect, I love the pedagogy of that. I love the, finding a teaching moment in there, like finding a kid who had a spark and an interest, and using that as an opportunity to feed more information rather than just the specific information that was asked, to start a whole thing. And then he told me about the summer camp that they had at Eastman, which I went to even before I started high school. And I was like the lowest of the low. Like I didn't even get into any of the bands that summer, But there were some great players around. Larry Goldings was around that summer, and some great saxophonists were around that summer. And they were all older than me, but I didn't really get to play with them. But I was in like Larry Golding's jazz arranging class.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've always appreciated too that the approach of really having to understand what it is that you're dealing with rather than just giving a straight answer. And in jazz education, the idea he could have just said, here it is, but it sticks with you. I mean, you're talking about it now. It sticks with you for years and years to come, and it also gives you the understanding that no matter what age you are, you have the opportunity to figure it out for yourself. It isn't like inaccessible knowledge that somebody has to give you. There's a possibility that you can just work this stuff out and learn it on your own.
Yeah, it's a real balancing act that you have to try to find as a teacher, right? It's like you want to provoke, you want to give some information, you want to give some knowledge, but you also want to sort of I can't think of a good phrase, but sort of tickle the interest,
Sure.
sort of get it percolating and get things moving so that people get the curiosity going in a student. And I think that's as a teacher now, it's one of the things I appreciate about that was that he was really he didn't just look past that opportunity to get the interest going.
Sure.
He took that opportunity and came up with a really cool way of doing it, knowing that I knew absolutely nothing. Like I actually wound up writing a big band chart without a score. I actually wrote a big band chart for my middle school jazz band with just parts.
Was that like some kind of Mozart thing or something? You're writing the whole alto part first, and then you go on to the...
I didn't even know about writing a score. Like I had to sort of learn about transposition, to do it. And
Sure.
I probably still have it around somewhere, actually.
That would be pretty funny to check out. It's no substitute for that either. It's just trying to figure it out. Just, all right, go for it, man,
I want to write something for my school band. I'm just going to give it a shot and see what happens.
Yeah.
And actually, the great thing about my middle school band director, Don Coley, was that when I finally did it, I finally wrote it. And I was like, hey, could we play this tune? He said, okay, I'll play Barry. You go and direct them.
Amazing. Yeah.
I'm like, really? So I stood up and I was like, yeah, it's your tune. You do it.
Yeah.
I've never done that before. But I have to tell you that the feeling of putting something in front of a band, even a 7th, 8th grade band, and having them realize it in front of me and having it come to life was a feeling that I think I'll never forget. It was that first time of like, wow, I've actually created this thing. It was in my head. Now there it is in front of me with live human beings making it. And it was that. I think that provided the fodder for many years of study.
For sure, yeah. I can understand. You get addicted to that. The concept of having something in your mind and then having it appear before you in real life. It's almost like a transcendent thing. It's the kind of thing that'll set you on the path to darkness for the rest of your life.
Oh, it's not darkness.
I told you.
I tell you what, though. I
You
mean,
were a
I think
beacon of warmth.
I think one of the difficulties or one of the challenges that we have to overcome with the technology like Finale. I mean, I love Finale. I've been using it for years and years, and I had the benefit of writing for bands where I didn't have a tool like that automatically would play the note back the moment you clicked it, or the moment you hit the play button. You sort of hear an approximation of it. I had to approximate it in my head for so long, or at the piano, or what am I going to imagine this to sound like? And there is a danger, I think, of relying too much on I'll just push the play button and that'll be how it sounds.
Right. I agree.
Yeah.
Especially because so much of jazz music is the improvisational element of it, that it's easy to either overwrite or underwrite or change things around depending on what the MIDI drums are going to sound like in your playback. When if you just were to hear it in your head, you would recognize that the guy is probably going to take, whoever's playing drums is going to take the liberty to create the vibe underneath the thing that you don't get from listening to a MIDI bass player or MIDI drummer hack through your arrangement or whatever. So this leaves us. So this sounds like it set the fire. You set the fire under you, and you continued on. So now you're into high school. Continued to play.
Yep.
And ended up at Eastman.
I did. I was from Rochester, and I knew the school, and I just loved the place, and I loved the people that I had met there, and I was so inspired all through high school at the amount of time I spent there. And I did look at other schools too, but it seemed like a good fit for my learning style and my interest in becoming a teacher also. To be able to still do some teaching. I taught some local kids.
Mm-hmm. You were teaching privately.
Yeah, I was teaching some private lessons, and I taught in the summer program that I had gone to when I was in high school.
Oh, cool.
Some of my students have gone on to be really successful. Like, Christy Norder? Are you familiar with that name?
I know that name. Yeah.
Emily probably knows her better.
Yeah,
because she's in the Reed world.
Mm-hmm.
But Christy's been doing great. She's been playing shows and working in New York, and you probably run into her at some point. But yeah, she was a student of mine, back when I was in college, and she was just tearing it up back then. So
pretty good, huh?
Yeah, it feels good. So I went to college at Eastman and stayed there and did my master's as well.
What were your degrees in? I don't want to get into that. I don't want to have to. Yeah, I'm not trying to interrogate you or anything.
No, it's okay. So what was interesting is at the time they didn't have an undergraduate major in jazz studies.
Okay.
So it was in saxophone performance. The great thing was that Ray Ricker was the saxophone teacher, and he was a fantastic clarinetist and saxophonist and woodwind doubler, as well as a great classical saxophonist and jazz saxophonist. And he just didn't think of it as any sort of distinction. It's like if you play saxophone, you have to be able to play, Bach transcriptions, and you have to be able to play solo literature, and you have to be able to play in a big band, you have to be able to play in small groups, and you have to be able to play Coltrane changes and just do everything.
Sure.
So that's the approach he took. It wasn't these are my classical students and these are my jazz students. It's just you're a saxophonist and you have to be able to play everything.
Sure. I imagine in undergrad too, that's a particularly useful approach because you really need that reinforcement of the technique and the specifics of just executing that you might not get. Well, you get it in jazz too, but it's maybe a different thing if you're looking at it as an all-encompassing operation.
Yeah, I think there's I thoroughly believe that the style of music you play is just that, it's a style. And I mean, I love playing jazz, and I love the approach that the process of making jazz. I love how it is different a process because it's inherently creative and all the things that we could talk about for hours and hours. Mm-hmm. But it is to sort of take this saxophonistic approach of we just have to learn to play the instrument, and we have to learn to get a good sound, and we have to learn to play in tune, and then at the same time, of course, we're going to go and play in quartets and trios and big bands, and we're going to improvise, and we're going to play jazz. And so I think there was definitely something to that. And it's to my I don't know, it's not my personal shame, but I do feel a sense of shame about the fact that I'm under the impression that the day that they announced announced is the wrong term, but the day they began a jazz studies major at Eastman, that the quality of the saxophone playing went down significantly.
Really?
Which I think is really unfortunate. It's I don't know if it had to happen that way or just did, but there was a period of time, I think, when jazz saxophone majors early on in that program came in and just didn't have the desire to build those kind of basic saxophonistic skills, or I think sometimes there's a sense among jazz players that kind of in-depth study is not for them, that it's for some other type of musician, that you
Sure.
don't have to put in that kind of work. And I'm not generalizing to all musicians or anything. It's
No, of course.
it's just there are some people who I think take the mindset of, I can play whatever I want, so therefore why do I have to worry about playing someone else's music or conforming to someone else's ideals, and without ever seeking the balance between the two, because there is a balance. I mean, of course, there's if you're ever trying to collaborate with anybody, you have to reach a balance. You have to be able to play with other people and play their music the way they want it to. Just like if you're going to play in a classical realm, you have to be able to play in tune with the other people.
Sure. And, I think of it as a trumpet player. There may be an element of it, too, which is just maybe a diverse set of a diverse skill set that you have to learn. So let me give you an example. Like lead trumpet players oftentimes can improvise, but oftentimes can't improvise as well, because there has to be a certain amount of time in your day dedicated to playing high notes. And if you're an improviser, it's a different thing. Like I'm always struggling with that balance of, okay, well, there's a lot involved in just being a creative improviser or a composer or a whatever. And yet at the same time, there's no substitute for keeping your chops up and being able to play. You can't show up to the gig, no matter how much of a genius you are, you can't show up to the gig and crash and burn, or else you're done, But you're a multifaceted character yourself. I mean, do you think now about the balancing of, your personality as a saxophone player versus as a composer versus as a teacher? Do you have to dedicate amounts of time in a day to covering this ground, or do you feel like one gets neglected, or how do you do it? Because you also learn how to play trumpet like a crazy person, and then all the other things that you're doing, and then you were a computer programmer for years. So how do you balance this stuff?
Actually, I like to say that for many years, trumpet was my strongest double, because I had trumpet playing friends all through middle school. So and we used to listen to Maynard Ferguson. So in like 7th, 8th grade, I was like, oh, wouldn't it be great to play like Maynard Ferguson? He was a guest artist at a local festival, and so by like 8th grade, I was playing trumpet just as much as I was playing saxophone. Mm-hmm. I think the difficulty with answering that question, Bobby, is that the short answer is yes. You have to you have to find a balance, right? But I think really the trick is, as in so many things, it's not the product, it's the process, right? Mm-hmm. It's the process is what's important. Sure. So the process of seeking the balance is what's important. As soon as you think you've achieved the balance, something's going to throw a wrench in your balance, and you're going to have to rejigger it.
Sure.
I feel
like that's kind of a Zen statement somehow.
Well, I think it is. I mean, you're a newly married guy, and you may think you have this great balance of like, we have this great relationship, and we have this great, we're in New York and we're playing gigs, and then all of a sudden there's a global pandemic, and it completely changes your whole balance. Or with a lot of people, it's like you've got this life, with two people, and everything is great. And then the next thing you know, you have a kid, and that completely throws the whole balance off into a different way. So it's like there's never a time when you find the balance. It's just seeking the balance and being aware that you're never going to find it. There's never going to be a perfect balance. You just have to keep looking for it and constantly be rejiggering it.
Sure.
So that's what I've found. I remember I was talking to a student a couple of years ago about this, and she was just in tears about something, about a situation with someone that she had tried to help, and that was, she felt like she wasn't doing enough to help this person, and I just said, she was worried that she would never be able to have enough time to do all the things, or to find this kind of balance. And I said, you're right, you never will find the balance. So if I were to tell you that when you get, I think she was sort of implying that, 5-10 years from now, like, I'll find the balance. And I'm like, nope. You're
That's pretty good advice.
You will never find the balance. I said, but maybe you can find peace in that, and then just seek to find the balance. Try to find it. Try to rejigger the best you can. And then as soon as you think you'll have it, it'll get messed up again. So just try to remember that it will get messed up. and you just have to try to rebalance whatever that is. And yes, because I think my interests are so wide, I always wanted to write. I always wanted to compose, and I wanted to play. And I liked playing flute. I really enjoyed that. And I liked playing trumpet. That was really fun. And I loved being in school. And I loved teaching. And I liked all these things. And I think actually I did have one of these like very conscious realizations at some point. As in high school, I took trumpet lessons with some pretty heavy hitters. I took trumpet lessons with a guy named Tom Drake, who I think he's in the St. Louis Symphony now. Just like stunningly good trumpet player, classical trumpet player. Had a great lesson from him once that really, I love to tell a story about that. But I would play trumpet, and I loved it. I feel good. I feel like I sort of had a different voice, but it was still me. And I could, I loved working on Clifford Brown transcriptions and Miles Davis transcriptions. I would try to play my Charlie Parker transcriptions on trumpet, and vice versa. I'd try to play Miles transcriptions on saxophone, and then I would have like a project, right? Like, there's a guest artist coming through, and I want to write a chart for the guest artist. So I'm like, well, I gotta just do nothing else, but I'm gonna stay up all night and I'm gonna write this chart. It's gonna take me 3 days. I'm gonna write this big band chart. And so that'd be 3 days where I just didn't really practice because all I was doing was writing this chart. And then my trumpet chops would be a disaster. And then my saxophone chops were like, oh, I can get those back pretty quickly. Saxophone's just an easier instrument to play. So, at least I think it is. Maybe it's just worked better with me.
I think it is.
I think it is. I'm allowed to say
no
this,
offense,
right?
I love the saxophone.
But it's not as physical. It's not as physically demanding.
There's not as many people getting hernias or having strokes because of the saxophone.
Yeah. So I could get my saxophone chops back right away. So I made a conscious decision. I'm like, well, if I'm going to be this diverse and I'm going to enjoy doing all these things, I can't be a trumpet major.
Sure.
I thought about it and I said, that's not going to work. I have to major on an instrument that I can put away for a couple of days, and while I'm doing this writing, so it worked.
Yeah, and you got to make those calls sometimes to find the balance where you say, all right, well, there's got to be a priority thing. There's only so many hours in the day.
Right.
What'd you do in grad school?
I did. Eastman has a program where they have master's degrees in the jazz program. They have a writing emphasis and a performing emphasis. So because I did the performance undergrad, I did the writing master's degree. And that's when Fred Sturm had just started there. So I got to work with Fred for a year.
Okay. Pretty good. Was Rayburn right there when you were there? Wasn't he there?
I was basically in the last group of people who got to work with Ray. And they had a memorial for Ray some years ago. And I was really the youngest person there. And I realized that everybody else had studied, because he was largely, he taught graduate programs. He taught the graduate writing program. Everyone had studied with him as a grad student. I actually studied with him as a high school student because they had this program called Arranger's Holiday, which he taught and Manny Album taught, where 3 weeks in the summer they would bring in a guest artist, and they had two different arranging classes, like a beginning class and an advanced class, and you had 2 hours of class a day, and then in the afternoon there would be reading sessions for 3 solid weeks of just class writing sessions. You just basically went to class and then you wrote all evening, and then you'd bring in the charts the next day.
Wow.
And it was great. So I remember I'd already been to the summer camp for a couple of summers for high school students, but I was really, I had already taken their arranging class for a couple of summers, and it was sort of time to move on, and someone suggested I could take this Arranger's Holiday. And I was, sort of the youngest person in that. I didn't discover until later that I had actually gotten graduate credit for that course that I took, like as a junior in high school. Because then
Amazing.
when I went to go do my master's degree, and I met with someone, and they looked at my transcript. They're like, "Well, you already got 4 credits towards your master's." I'm like, "I do." Like, when? Like, when did I do that? And they're like, "Oh, like 1985." Like,
That's a trip.
yeah. I was like, I didn't remember that.
Yeah.
So I'd gotten to work with Ray, and got a couple of private lessons, and got to sort of get his take on professionalism, and it wasn't always easy. He was pretty intense, but definitely took approach of, this is how a professional behaves. This is how professional acts in a studio, in a recording studio, and it was all meant to really be very professional training.
Sure, yeah. His book, Inside the Score, is still the best book that I have on big band arranging.
I still use it for my arranging class.
Yeah, it may have been where I got it, actually. It might have been where I got it in the first place.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Did you just go straight from grad school to New York?
No. I went from grad school. I finished my master's quickly because I had already had some credit, and I spent some time in the summers. I basically did like 1 year and 2 summers and sort of compressed it into 1 year, 14 months essentially. And then I stayed in Rochester for a year. And I was lucky, I actually got to do some teaching at Eastman the next year. I got to teach some oral skills classes because I had taught oral skills as a graduate assistant. So I did that for a while. And then I got a job at Florida A&M University. I applied for a jazz teaching job, teaching jazz saxophone, and got it. So next thing you know, I moved down to Tallahassee and taught jazz saxophone at FAMU.
Pretty good. Now, is this the tale that you were doing I want you to cover something that I remember you telling me, but I can't remember the specifics.
Okay.
Where you were doing a competition someplace and you played the music of Thelonious Monk. Was that the link
That's, you remember well.
All
yes.
right. What's the tale here? Because I think it's an illustrative and kind of an interesting approach.
It's a little long. You don't mind the long-winded
I
tale?
don't care, man. We got plenty. We got endless time here. These digital formats, we're not going to run out of tape.
It's all just the tape's not going to go. At the.
It does. There's a much bigger problem.
Exactly right. Yeah, we'll get error messages on the screen.
Yeah,
you have run out of memory. Yeah. So I had. So the beginning of the story is that I think as a senior in college, I had applied to a jazz saxophone competition sponsored by NASA. The North American.
Shooting people into space, NASA?
Yes. No, not that NASA. No, the North American Saxophone Alliance, NASA.
Okay.
They still are called NASA. And North American Saxophone Alliance had a jazz competition as part of their conference. And you sent a tape in, and they took 3 finalists. And I got to be one of the finalists. And another buddy of mine from Eastman was another finalist. And then there was a third finalist. I think he was from North Texas. And both the other guys were great players. And it was we got along really well. And it wasn't a bad situation between us. The rules of the contest were that we had to basically prepare a 20-minute set, and we were going to play our 20-minute set. They were providing a rhythm section. It was a rhythm section from the military band that was stationed there. I think it was in Fort Myer. I don't remember which band the rhythm section came from, but and at the time I was really into Thelonious Monk, so I sort of prepared a whole set of Thelonious Monk tunes. The other requirement, though, was that we had to play Stella by Starlight. It was like everyone had to play Stella by Starlight, and then the rest of the tunes you chose yourself. Mm-hmm. So because I was so into Monk, I sort of put together, I don't want to call it arranged. In retrospect, it was a little bit highfalutin, maybe a little... I don't know what I could say about it, except it wasn't great.
Okay.
I put together a version of Stella by Starlight for which it was meant to be in the style of Thelonious Monk.
Okay.
And I specifically was meant to be like the Thelonious Monk tune Skippy, which actually was the same harmony that Monk used for T for Two.
Okay. Sure. Yeah.
So the first chord was was A flat 7, A flat 13, flat 9. I don't remember exactly how it went. Basically,
Sure.
the chords just went around a circle of fifths, and then just like Skippy for the last, in the last 4 bars, if they started moving in quarter notes rather than in half notes.
Okay.
Rhythm section did not know what to make of this at all. They were like, they just expected to play Stella by Starlight, and I'm handing them lead sheets for Stella by Starlight with completely different changes. Anyway, it did not go very well. The other tunes I played, I guess they were okay. I did a maybe Ask Me Now, the Monk ballad.
Mm-hmm.
I did a blues. Gosh, maybe I also did In Walked Bud or something like that.
Sure.
So, play my set. The other people play theirs. I think I must have gone first or second. So I played my 20 minutes, walked around, and I walked into the back of the auditorium to listen. And then when the other players were done, it was in an auditorium, and there was an audience, right? Because it was a big conference, so there was probably 200 people in the audience. Mm-hmm. So afterwards, I walked from there into the hallway behind the auditorium, or front of the auditorium, basically where the doors were, and everybody was filing out. And I distinctly remember standing there, my suit and tie and with my saxophone, and everybody filing out, literally like looking past me, so they didn't have to make eye contact. So I realized that they hated my playing so much that they couldn't even muster up a thank you for coming,
Sure.
Thank you for driving 6 hours to Virginia to come here.
Yeah.
And so I stood there just, feeling sorry for myself and looking like an idiot for about 10 minutes. Mm-hmm. And then Pat Meehan, classical saxophone teacher at Florida State, who just retired a couple of years ago, walked up to me and he said, "Hey, Mike, my name is Pat. I'm the saxophone teacher at Florida State. I just want to tell you," I'm paraphrasing here, but I just want to tell you that I really appreciate that you didn't try to win the contest. You just tried to make music, and you put together a musical set that was meaningful and musical, and it showed what you were all about. I heard who you were, and it was a great musical. It was a great set of jazz. He said, "I don't care who wins the competition." He said, "Anytime you want to come down to Florida State, you're more than welcome in any capacity whatsoever." And he was the only person who really said anything to me afterwards.
Uh-huh.
And I didn't even think about it because it was polite. I felt like it was polite, but I didn't really get the depth of it until later. I didn't get
Sure.
that this really meant something, that someone would actually say that. I didn't realize that that's just not the kind of thing that people say.
Right. You really have to. Yeah. He has to be paying attention and really care about it.
Yes.
It's better than a sounds great, man.
Right. Yes. Right. So yeah, I didn't care. I didn't care that people didn't lie. Like I wouldn't want them to lie and say, "Oh, that was great."
Sure.
But it would have been nice for them to say thank you for coming.
Yeah, I get it. Sure.
So fast forward 3 or 4 years, whenever it was that so if that was like 90 or 91, and I played for the job in 93, 3 or 4 years later, I got the job, and then I found out from the guy who hired me that he wasn't a saxophonist, so he had sort of showed the list of names to Pat, because across the railroad tracks, and from FAMU to Florida State is the other side of town. I didn't even make this connection that he showed him, and he apparently saw my name and said, "Oh, that's someone you should take a second look at." So
Sure.
I think that's how I got to the short list. Basically, was that he remembered me from the thing.
Because you had chosen to do something distinctive, because you chosen to follow your own path in some respects.
That's what I take from this. That's exactly what I take from it, is that had I chosen to try to impress and play fast and work up a really sort of chopsy thing, maybe I could have won the contest. I don't know. Who knows? The other players were really good too, so yeah, I don't take that for granted. But I could have tried harder to win. Instead, I really did just try to say, well, this is what I'm studying right now. This is who I am. I'm studying Monk. I'm going to play a bunch of Monk tunes.
Sure.
And,
But in my mind, that's what makes jazz music, or improvised music, or creative music in whatever capacity, is the idea that what you're going for, there may be technical facility is a means to an end, but the end is being able to create your own, is to be able to express your own viewpoints.
Amen, brother.
Even if that is Thelonious Monk. You know what I always think about is I feel like if Thelonious Monk entered the Thelonious Monk competition nowadays, like if he came back from the grave, like he'd lose they'd be like, what is this?
Yeah, crash and burn. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But because he did his own thing, he's become such a monumental icon in, American music.
It's really true. Yeah, you're absolutely right. We can't say that for sure because, they have different judges, different years, and who knows, maybe, I have another funny story about a contest judging, which is, you want to hear the story? This is
go for it.
Semi-related. Mm-hmm. There was a contest at the CU Boulder, Colorado University in Boulder, mm-hmm. and we had a group. My buddy Corey Combs, who's a wonderful bassist, and he really turned me on to a lot of free jazz, Ornette Coleman and free improvisation. Mm-hmm. He put together a group that was me on alto, tenor sax, Aaron Drake, who's now a mouthpiece maker, Curtis Pivert, trombone, and Corey played bass. And it was a quartet. That was it, just 3 horns and bass. And we did a whole bunch of Ornette Coleman tunes and original tunes that Corey had written, and sort of his group. Mm-hmm. We applied to this. They had a small group jazz competition at CU Boulder, and you applied as a group. And they took 3 finalist groups, and the 3 finalists got some travel money to go out there and perform. And it was actually really cool. Art Landy was one of the judges, and he also was a clinician. I don't know if you know Art Landy's playing at all. He's like just a wonderful improviser. He's like sort of a guru of creative music in the Denver area.
Okay.
He's really been inspirational for a lot of people. His clinic was great, and it was really fun. Really, I just played duo with him, and anyhow. We go and we play, and the 2 other bands, all 3 bands that played were just really good, but so completely different. And I think what people felt like at the end was like, there's no way we can judge one band against the other, because we did this, like Ornette Coleman free jazz kind of tunes and original tunes. Another band did sort of an electric thing, mm-hmm. and another band did sort of a hard bop thing, and. I don't even remember who won, but what I remember hearing about was that the judges were supposed to bring back a verdict and like announce it at the evening concert, and they just took hours. And the story that I heard sort of through the grapevine was that they argued with each other to like not to the death, but as close as you can get, as like, I absolutely refuse to let that band win, and then this other person, I absolutely refuse to let that band win, and it just apparently it wound up with like. A couple of guys like absolutely hating each other and like refusing to talk to each other anymore, and one of them just walked out, and that was the end of it. So by default, we didn't win, and then Corey wound up going the next year, also, and that time he put together like a hard bop band, and that year it was a different set of judges, and the more creative group won.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Man, that's funny,
that's the end of the story. Is that you just never
never know.
Never know.
But
although. One of the recordings that I got that we played at that, I got a great cassette recording of our set, and I actually took we did like a free ballad, and I took the free ballad and I turned it into a big band chart. I just transcribed the whole thing, like 4-minute thing.
Oh, interesting.
And turned it into orchestrated it as a big band chart.
I may vaguely remember this. Did we ever play it? Do you still have it?
Yeah, I do. We might have. And actually,
what's the name of the tune?
It's called Free.
Oh, okay. It sounds familiar. That we might have done that when I was in it.
Yeah, I wrote it for the BMI Jazz Composers thing. It got performed at the concert.
Oh, is that right? That's just something else.
Yeah.
I was just thinking about a similar concept recently, the idea of taking a long-form free improvisation and trying to orchestrate it. It's kind of a fascinating concept. Mm-hmm. As a teacher, how do you view competition in jazz? What's its role?
I think there's nothing inherently wrong with competition. Mm-hmm. I think to deny that competition exists or that it plays any role would be folly. But I think there's, like many things, there's positive versions of competition, and then there's destructive versions of competition.
Okay.
And I think maybe the outcome the outcome shouldn't be viewed as the important part. Like if you know, if like you went to the monk competition and you didn't win, but you met a bunch of great people, and it was like it was in the spirit of, I know there's this competition here, but wow, that person can really play, and that person has a really unique take, and the judges are like, you know, doing it in a way that feels supportive in some way, you know, and like even this competition in Colorado, like even the fact that that apparently these judges just got so mad at each other felt like at least someone there got what we did, and like actually like even though we were doing something completely different, they got the gist of it, they got the spirit of it, which was sort of heartening. So I don't think there's no easy answers to that, but I think you know it, like when you're in a competitive environment that you feel can be positive and supportive, you feel it, and when you're in a competitive environment that doesn't feel supportive, doesn't feel like it's there for any sort of good purpose, you feel that too.
Sure.
And I'm sure that as a resident of New York, you get to feel that a lot, you know, because you get both sides of that probably every day.
Sure, for sure.
You get the sense that you get the competitive sense of like, there are some people who feel that there are only so many gigs and we're all competing for this small slice of pie. And then you get another set of people that believe that, well, the more people we bring into it, the greater the creativity, that we can build things from nothing and we can create new things where there was nothing before, like Emily is doing with the, you know, and I'm sure you're doing the same thing in all sorts of ways with your non-ed, and you can create something out of nothing. And of course you have to compete on some level there, you know, but if it's really more about creating something new and being creative and the spirit of meeting people and collaboration, then the competition can be a constructive thing.
Sure.
Am I evading the question?
No, I don't think so. I think your point that the process of it is really what's important. I think if you went into it and you were like, you know, you get back at the end of the competition and you like, you know, you break your baton in half and throw it at the saxophone section. You go, you're worthless. This will never amount to, you know, whatever. Like, then you've missed the whole thing. But if you go into the competition and say, all right, here's like, this is what we would do in high school is we go to do the Berkeley competition in Boston. And it was our director, David Schumacher, would be like, all right, here's your job is to go around and check out the other solid high school bands. And the point was really more to try to gain some inspiration from hearing people who could play than, you know, who are our peers, than it was about winning the thing necessarily. But I guess it's a perk to win, you know what I mean? I guess. But I've always thought it, you know, to me, it's a little bit of a tricky comparison because in a college band or a high school band or whatever doing a competition, you know it's a competition. Whereas in New York, it's funny because I think some people, it depends on the context. And I've met, you know, countless amazing, personable, creative people, and whatever. I'm not trying to be negative, but there are some people that see it as a competition, and other people in the same context don't know it's a competition. So it's a little bit of a different thing, you know what I mean? And then it becomes about it really becomes more about, okay, well, here's what I'm doing. I'm going to try. It's more maybe akin to what you're talking about with the Thelonious Monk concept in some regard. Is it's like, well, what is it that I'm trying to bring out of I have a group. I mean, well, let me give you an example. When I'm playing with my group, I want people I want to play with people who are able to play inside music and also play free music and who are comfortable in both of those worlds. So I might meet somebody at a jam session who's just absolutely killing, but can't, you know, is a little bit more, you know, sounds very specific, like sounds exactly like Coltrane or something, but maybe like early 60s Coltrane and not mid 60s Coltrane. So, you know, whatever. Like, or there are people who will hear different musicians and say, well, I want to play with that person because they have a particular voice. I guess you could argue that there's some competition in that because you want to be the creative person or something, but it's a different thing than being like, you know, I don't know. It's not like we sit around and go, well, who's better, you know, Sonny Rollins or Dexter Gordon or whatever. Like, if you do, it's only for a laugh. You know? But it's not the same thing as like a concerto competition or something where I think there's probably more precision to the nature of it.
Have you? I'm sure you've seen this article, but I send it to all my students nowadays, and I can't remember if I would have sent this to you back when you were a student. at IC. There's that article by Brad Meldau called "Ideology, Burgers, and Beer."
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah,
Sum it up for me. I forget exactly the specifics.
I hope I don't sum it up just terribly badly. I think the crux of it is that when he was coming up in New York, he had these great friends, and they would go out and have burgers and beer at this place after the gig, and they would play this little game, like little matching name pairs, where they would say, like, who's better, and they would say, Charlie Parker or Charlie Brown. Like goofy things, right?
Yeah.
And just it was a joke. They were just joking around with. And if you see the article, you see some of the name pairs they came up with, and some of them were just totally ludicrous.
I feel like the Sonnies were in there, something like Sonny Rollins versus Sonny Stitt or something.
Well,
like
apparently
that.
That's what started the big argument.
Okay.
Is that it turned deadly serious, was that it was Sonny Rollins versus Sonny Stitt, and it wound up sort of stratifying the group into people for whom Sonny Stitt was like the pinnacle of creativity because he just showed up and played. He just blew with no sort of preconception. He was a great blower. And then the sort of other side of the table said that no, there's no way that Sonny Stitt is as great as Sonny Rollins, because Sonny Rollins has this whole compositional vibe, and they're in the same. They lump people like Monk and Duke Ellington in this realm of great, with Sonny Rollins, because he spins out all these motives that's in a very sort of compositional way. And then the rest of the article discusses sort of how you can't really have one without the other. Both of these things are necessary. We need that spirit of just showing up and blowing, and at the same time we need the sort of composerly sense. It's just kind of two sides of the same coin. It's like two parts of your brain.
Yeah.
And so I love the dichotomy of it. I love thinking about all the different impacts that has.
Sure. And I think that brings to mind, too, all of these other kind of false dichotomies that we have, like I can understand schools, and I totally get, like, there might be a different thing between being a Maynard Ferguson style trumpet player and being a Chet Baker style trumpet player. Like, I get that there's different vibes in there, but like the Ella Fitzgerald, Billie Holiday, rivalry in some respects or whatever, or like these ideas that like you're one thing or the other. And I think I feel like it's easy to fall into the way of thinking that's like, oh, I'm supposed to follow one of these paths, but you can follow any number of paths. That was something that hung me up, is I'm like, well, I like all these different things. What path am I supposed to choose? It's like, well, my path is the combination of all of these disparate concepts. You can like Anthony Braxton and Chet Baker at the same time. There's nothing wrong with being on two ends of the same thing.
Yeah, there definitely can be a danger with like sort of associating yourself with some air quotes school. It's like, oh, I'm in this school, therefore I have to follow this path. And I think that's what I've admired about you over the years, is that I love your dedication to some things, but then your interest in a wide range of inputs from all different musics and extra musical kinds of things that get into your thinking and into your music. And that's what I've admired about you for a long time.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I appreciate that. It's gotten me into a little bit of trouble. It might have been easier to.
I doubt any real trouble.
Well, not any real trouble. I try to avoid that, but yeah, we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, go on. With the story about the that saxophone competition, it's like, but if that's what you bring to the table, Bobby, then whenever you meet people, like you may not appeal to everybody out in the world, but when you do find people who you appeal to, like if your musicianship and your vibe and your whole way of thinking, if that appeals to people, that's going to be because they really do get you and like your music and like what you're all about. And those are going to be much better collaborators for you ultimately than people who are just looking for someone to emulate player X or Y or Z.
Sure. That's kind of a high risk, high reward approach too, though. I mean, thinking back to Thelonious Monk as an example, like, I don't know what was I don't think anybody knows what was going through his mind at the time, but he had to really commit. I mean, he was Thelonious Monk. Like, no, I mean, he was as Thelonious Monk as he could possibly be. You know what I mean? Like,
Thelonious Monk was as Thelonious Monk as you could be. That's how true.
I mean, he really committed. He could play anything. That's what I love so much about him. Is I've said semi-jokingly that he's the best jazz musician because he's the guy that you can hear he can play T for two or his own zany compositions, or he can play whatever, and you know in an instant that it's Thelonious Monk, and it's an amazing sound that he came up with. But nobody sounds like him. I mean, you can see the roots to Duke Ellington, and you can see the roots to James P. Johnson, or you can understand this. But he can't, especially. I mean, he's surrounded by Bud Powells and everybody, Art Tatum's, and everybody else, and he's going to sound like Thelonious Monk. And that's why we're talking about him right now. But at the time, he could have said, all right, I'm going to sound exactly like, everybody wants me to sound, or I mean, that takes a certain leap of faith that, people are going to be down for what you're coming up with, even if it's, unconventional.
It's so true. You're absolutely right. I like your way of describing it as high risk, high reward. Of course, yeah, you wouldn't get anywhere without taking a bit of a risk. I was just the other day, someone asked me about if there was any interesting, like particularly compelling Charlie Parker recordings, or like really interesting, like blues recordings of Charlie Parker. Mm-hmm. And I had just listened to one, and I hadn't fully heard it because I was actually listening to it and I sort of fell asleep while I was listening to it. So I went back and listened to it again. It's called Funky Blues, and it's one of these like jams. I think it's on the Verve collection. And the Verve collection is huge, right? There's like 10 CDs. There's a lot of music there. And I had the Verve collection back in high school, so I had listened to a lot of this stuff. Mm-hmm. And this was not one of the ones I had ever spent a lot of time listening to. And now, in my 50s, I pulled it out again and was just blown away by the fact that on this blues, the first soloist is Johnny Hodges. And then the next soloist is Charlie Parker.
That's a trip.
I'm not aware of them ever playing together, other than this one recording. Maybe there are other ones I can't think of, but I'm not aware of any off the top of my head. And to hear the difference between these two giants of the saxophone, and then Benny Carter is also on this recording. Mm-hmm. So 3 giants of the saxophone, of specifically of the alto saxophone, and just how completely different they went. But both had they were such iconic, stylists on their instrument. But yet, like, immediately recognizable, from one note. You can tell Johnny Hodges immediately. You can tell Charlie Parker immediately. Just like, oh yeah, there's no question. There's no one else who plays like that. There's no one else who plays like Johnny Hodges. So I love thinking about things like this. One of the things that makes so many of these players appealing to me is when it's just, that's just who that is.
Sure. Now, go on.
Oh, I was. One of the greatest compliments I ever got, actually, was from my buddy Dave Dussman. And I was playing a gig in Rochester, and I hadn't lived in Rochester in years. And he was with his wife at an Italian restaurant, and I just got hired to play at this Italian restaurant, and I was around the corner. And he said he heard me warming up, just played like 3 notes, and just threw the mouthpiece on, just threw the reed on, played like 3, just little bit of, and he said, "Oh, that's Mike Titlebaum," and he knew that it was me, even though I hadn't been in town in years.
That's amazing,
but he hadn't heard me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was like, what a great compliment.
Yeah, for sure.
Anyway, I'm sorry. What were you asking?
As a teacher, I know that you are very supportive of people coming up with their own sound or trying out experiments. I know that in times past, in my times before and probably after studying with you in Ithaca for what I did, whatever that whatever you'd call it, taking your classes and various things like that. I remember getting in a little trouble for trying some things, and you were always open to, sure, let's do it, let's get wild. And I know that, I mean, you personally have, you'll write big band charts on, like World War II Pizza Man, incorporating Greek elements into big band music and wild stuff like that. How do you balance as a teacher encouraging people to sort of pursue their own voice or their own, let's say, intuitive character in their music, and also really establish the history of the music and the tradition and the technical element of it?
Wow, that's a difficult question, and I'm going to give you the same cop-out answer about finding balance in your life and in your studies because I really do feel this way. Every now and then I'll be working with a student and I'll just think, man, we just got to put in more time on fundamentals, like we just got like, and with students who are like really good or really creative and really have an interesting voice, I'm like, man, you need to be able to do this in all 12 keys. Like you have to, it's one thing to play it in this key, but if you can't play in all 12 keys with facility, then you're going to be hamstrung. You're going to be, you're going to have these deficiencies. And sometimes I have to rejigger that. I have to rejigger that broadly as a teacher. Sometimes I have to completely rethink what I'm doing with everybody. And then sometimes I have to rethink with a given student. It's like, we've just spent the last 10 weeks and doing all this creative stuff. And I just realized that the thing that you just played, you can't play in any other key. So
Sure.
That's a problem, And then on the other hand, sometimes I'll hear a student, her student was improvising on something and they were playing one of the exercises that I had given them. I don't remember which exercise it was. Maybe it was like a little chromatic enclosure exercise. And they did it in a way that made me feel as though it were my reaction to it in that moment was that it felt contrived.
Mm-hmm.
And so my feeling was like, oh man, I gotta let you open up a little bit.
Sure.
I gotta let you like that was it was great, but it didn't move me. It didn't didn't make me feel like you were in the moment and really creating something. So then
Sure.
I had to sort of rejigger in the opposite direction, like let's turn off the lights and just try to create something new here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that seems to me a very responsible teacherly answer too, which is just that it depends on who you're teaching and what their perspective is and what their background is.
I hope so, because every now and then I get jealous of when I hear people talk about like super organized methodological, is that a word?
Sure.
Methodological teachers who have, you're going to be studying with me for 4 years, and here's how we will progress. We will go through this, and then we will go through this exercise, and then you'll do this exercise, and then for your junior recital, and that's all. And sometimes I'm like, gosh, should I have that? Should I have that level of forethought? Should I really be that organized and that planned? And so I think there's benefits and drawbacks to my method. I think with a guy like you, a musician who's, really thoughtful and studious and creative all at the same time, like you might really react very well to that kind of approach, but it doesn't work well with everybody.
The rigid thing, you mean?
Either that or the overly creative thing.
Yeah.
Sometimes I have to rejigger because, there's I'll have a student who doesn't want the rigor, doesn't feel like they need it.
Sure.
And my reaction, and I have to be like, no, you really need to, I spent a lot of time making sure that if I could play a song, I could play it in 12 keys. I did not want any key being any less facile than any other key. And I really, and Charlie Parker did this too. This is not just me. Like that's the whole story about the woodshed. He went into the woodshed and played Cherokee in 12 keys. So he could play, and you can
Sure.
totally hear it. He, when it comes time to, like if he has to play a 2-5-1 in concert B, which is A flat on the saxophone, it's a super uncomfortable key. Like he can do it, listen to This Song Is You, like he can, like it's right at the, like getting into the bridge. It's like, whoa,
Sure.
Maybe,
Yeah.
maybe it's at the end of the bridge. I can't remember. Anyways, so
yeah.
So I'm sometimes I think it's good, and then sometimes I have to really check myself with what I'm doing, and it's not a balance that I've found. It's definitely a balance that I still continue to seek.
This may be the theme of this whole conversation: is the ever-seeking balance, and that may be the balance itself. Is the seeking of the balance.
It's the process, not the product.
See, I think I probably could have gotten. I think I probably would have benefited from some more of that rigor, having done a philosophy degree in undergrad, and I just did whatever I wanted to do a lot of the time. So,
That's fair.
Might have benefited from some of that, but it depends on. I guess it depends on person to person and time to time and everything.
But you were inspired too. Like, didn't you went off and you took some lessons with Walter White, right? Someone who had like sort of ridiculous instrumental chops.
Walter was the greatest example of that because he was like on the other end of the spectrum from me. I was like, doing zany stuff, and he was like a monster player. I mean, I couldn't get away with anything with him.
Right. That's exactly what I was thinking. It was like that must have. So you were even if you didn't find, even if you didn't think it was in balance, I admired the fact that you sought out someone like that, even though, yeah, like his style of playing was probably not your style. Like you wouldn't play in his, I assume. Maybe every trumpet player secretly wants to have that kind of thing in their bag of tricks.
Sort of, but certainly at the time, he was almost the opposite of the way that I thought about playing. Like, I was into Miles Davis and Don Cherry, and he was, he'd been playing with Maynard Ferguson. Like, it was on the opposite end of the whole thing, But that was the benefit to me of studying with somebody like him is that, and it was lucky because Ithaca, except for Ithaca College and Paul Merrill at Cornell, there wasn't a lot of. It's not like I had a whole range of, and I couldn't study with anybody at Ithaca because I wasn't a major really. So it just was a lucky break that he happened to be in town at that given time because who knows, That was kind of the option, really. But it was great. It was an amazing experience to get to work with him,
That's great.
So how did you end up in New York? So did you go from Florida A&M to New York?
Yeah. I remember actually, so I was there, and I this was another one of those moments where I had to sort of make a decision. And I basically saw two paths. Mm-hmm. And there was I saw that I could have stayed at Florida A&M, and I could have, like for nothing, I could have done a DMA over at Florida State while I was teaching at Florida A&M, and gotten tenure and stayed there the rest of my life. Like I could have done that, because I was an employee of the state of Florida. Like that was one of the options. You could take like up to 6 credits, at another state school. So, or I could try to be a musician, because I realized that I was trying to teach music, and I felt a little bit fraudulent. I felt like I had a lot of skill on the instrument, but I was teaching students. At Florida A&M, there was a lot of students who were older than me. There was a lot of first-time college students. There was a lot of people who had spent time after high school working, and then were starting college because they wanted to become band directors. Mm-hmm. Cannonball Adderley had been at that school, and there's a great connection to the Adderleys, and he had been a teacher, and so I felt all these connections. There were students. I was in my 20s, and there were students in my 30s who I felt like had more knowledge of life than I had. I was like, I'm not sure I can keep doing this if I don't have this life experience. I just grew up. I mean, I had hard times, but I did just kind of walk right into this job. Mm-hmm. And so I talked to my buddy, a recording engineer, Dave Dussman, who came down and he recorded a recital for me, and we sort of talked about it. And I just remember thinking, yeah, if I'm going to pursue a life in music, I have to try to go to New York and sort of see what it's like.
Sure.
And give it a shot.
And it's a bold step because you're trading, in that instance, you're trading certainty for uncertainty. But that's the move, is you wanted to say, all right, well, on my deathbed, am I going to want to have, taken the chance or whatever?
And in retrospect, when I'm now at my age and I look back at all these decision points, and you mentioned risk reward, and I look at I definitely don't make these risk reward decisions lightly. I really think about them a lot, mm-hmm. and I think about the risks that I took, and I wonder, like, did I make the right decision? I'm in no way convinced that it was the wrong decision, but I do wonder, like, what would have happened had I stayed? Would I have had a different life? And I don't know. I mean, my life took so many weird twists and turns after that it's just so hard to know. But
yeah, everybody out there listening to this right now who's about to make a radical life decision, it really wants you to say, No, it's exactly the right decision. But what's funny is every time I talk to anybody about their kind of the forks in the road and they choose a path, it feels like no, you never know. You never know if that was the right decision, in the end. Maybe sometimes you do, but it's always up in the air. Who knows.
I think the most difficult, I think there are many decisions that you can make that you could undo that decision later, right?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Like, there aren't that many decisions that are just final, that you have no choice about afterwards. It's like, you move to New York, it doesn't work out. Well, you could move somewhere else,
Right.
Could I have gotten that job back again? I don't know. Maybe not. Who knows? But it's those are the ones that stick with you because they're so sort of pivotal. Other than having children, like how many decisions in your life really fall into that category?
Sure.
No, honestly, I think things had to happen the way they happened for me to be happy now.
Sure.
Because I do think sometimes, like, the possibility of like a horrific midlife crisis is because you didn't try something that you thought about trying.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can definitely look back on it and say, did I try to move to Florida knowing absolutely nobody and just taking this job and just to see what would happen? Yeah, I did. Did I then pick up and try to move to New York knowing only a handful of people and find an apartment and just try to make a life as a musician? Yeah, I tried it. Did it work out perfectly? No. Was it a complete and utter disaster? No. Good things happened. And I met some great people and had made some great music. And so, I should be more convinced that it was the right call, actually. It's not that I think it was the wrong decision. It was just, sometimes you go back and you think, well, what would have happened had I made the other decision?
Sure.
What would have happened?
Yeah, but that's life. You never know.
Right. Yep. There's no way to know. It's fun to think about, though.
For sure. Yeah. How long were you in New York?
See, I moved in '94. I moved up to the suburbs a couple years later, still sort of staying in the New York area. Moved to a different suburb. I basically stayed in the New York City region until 2008.
Okay.
So,
Sure.
But you were doing, now, when you first moved there, you were doing gigs as a saxophonist.
writing,
Were you teaching
gigs.
privately, things like that?
Yeah, I was teaching. I taught at the Ethical Culture School, taught at the
Interesting.
Fieldston School.
Okay.
Ethical Culture is on Central Park West.
Mm-hmm.
Fieldston is their related high school up in Riverdale.
Okay.
Taught there and got some part-time teaching there, and
And you were playing Broadway shows and things like that too, right?
just one. I don't play clarinet. That was the one double that I just never got any good at.
Interesting. It's pretty amazing that you've learned how to play the trumpet, and as an alto saxophonist, you just never wanted to tackle the clarinet.
I think I told Emily about the lick that made me stop playing clarinet altogether. I think it's in my Facebook feed. You could probably find it because it still haunts me to this day.
What is it?
I took a 3-month tour of the musical Oliver.
Mm-hmm.
Chris McDonald, who's still a friend of mine, wonderful reed player, was on the road for about 3 months, and she needed a sub. She got a different show, and so I wound up meeting the tour halfway and did like 3 months, and it was clarinet, soprano sax, flute, piccolo, I think was the book, and there was a clarinet solo. It was in 6 flats. It was in E flat minor, and it was like all these pinky stuff. And I would swear I would squeak going over the break like half the nights, and it was just totally solo. It was just like me and like it was like the end of the tune, and the singers had stopped singing, and the lights were dimming, and it was just clarinet, and it was like squeak. Oh, it just traumatized me, and I swear to God, I have not performed the clarinet since. I may have picked it up like 3 times since then.
Man, that's surprising. Given your diligence on this stuff, it's that has to be a real mother of a lick, man.
I'll send it to you if you want.
Yeah, I want to hear it now.
No, the trumpet always just felt better to me.
That's the only time that sentence has ever been emitted by a human voice.
Well, what's funny too is actually when I taught for a couple of years for the Paul Effman Music Service, and
for like 2 years, and it was like band in a box. You go around to all these different schools, and it was just easier for me to actually play trumpet than to try to like worry about reeds. So no matter what class I was teaching, even if I was teaching a flute class, I would just play trumpet along with them. So I was wound up for like 2 years. I wound up playing trumpet, like 8 hours a day. And at the end of that, my trumpet chops felt so good.
Oh yeah.
I was just strong. I was like, it felt so good.
That's
But
wild, man.
yeah, not since then.
But you did Cats anyway. You were playing Cats.
Oh yeah, Cats. So there were 2 books in Cats. I subbed for John Cipolla, who wonderful saxophonist.
Yep.
Subbed for him, and then because I subbed for him, then Ted Nash, who was playing one of the other books, asked me to sub for him a couple of times. So he was playing, and neither of those books had clarinet, so it was like flute, piccolo, tenor, soprano, some combination of those.
Sure.
So I got to sub it. Yeah, but I didn't play any other shows because most shows have clarinet too. I was just lucky I happened to waltz into a situation that I just could play flute, piccolo, and saxophone.
Sure. And were you leading a big band too, or did you put one together sporadically, or?
What was
I did. Yeah, whenever I had the opportunity, it wasn't regular. Like the bassist Neil Miner asked me to put together something. He was doing like a new music thing at Smalls, so I put together a big band for that. Actually, that's how I got the Cats thing, believe it or not. The Cats thing was that he asked me if I wanted to do something. I was like, I really would like to put my own big band together for this. So I just called a bunch of people, and John Cipolla was one of the people I called to play in my band. I'd never met him before. I just heard his name. And so I called him, and we just struck up a conversation about, mutual friends and stuff. And after like 5 minutes, he was like, "Hey, do you happen to play piccolo?" I'm like, "Yeah, I do." He's like, "I can use another sub on the sub list for Cats." I was like, "Okay." So because I offered him a gig, he started offering me gigs.
It's amazing how that works, isn't it?
It is amazing.
It's sort of it's the New York story in many regards. So
I don't
how
think
did
he
you
played my gig. I think he couldn't do it, but I got a
Oh,
gig
really?
from him instead. Yeah.
Oh, there you go. Even better trade.
How did you get from playing music then to computer programming? What was that path like? Because I know there's a lot of people that I think it's an interesting story that you went back. You started in music, then you went to real job land, and then ended up back as the head of the jazz department at Ithaca College. Because a lot of people, I feel like, this may also be a false dichotomy of you have to either be a professional musician and you're just playing all the time, or you get a real job and there's no in between, or a lot of people are really clinging to the musical path when, there's any number of possible paths within that world.
I'm happy to tell you about my path, but I'm the first one to say that if anyone aspires to be a college teacher like I am, in a million years they shouldn't follow my path.
Okay.
It's totally not the path to take. It's not the right. I'm in so many ways so lucky. Not to take anything away from my work ethic and my, as hard as I've worked and the things that I've done and the low times that I've had in my life and how I've, worked myself out of a pretty deep jam through just, blood, sweat, and toil, which I think is more important than whether or not my path is a good path. But yeah, so because I had learned computer programming as a little kid, after I was in New York for a few years and got married and then got divorced, and then I needed money, like real money. I had, paying child support, in the, mid to late 90s. And I just was not, I actually asked my manager, the department head at the Fieldston School, like, I need full-time hours. And she said, I'm really sorry. I would love to be able to give you full-time hours. I just can't. I just don't have them to give you. And that's when I realized that I needed to find a job. I just needed money, and music was just not going to cut it for that immediate need. So I started taking computer class. So that's when I got the job working for Paul Effman, and that was full-time. And that was, it was great, but for me, it was not a perfect fit. It was super exhausting. I don't have a music education background, so it was actually really difficult for me to work with 3rd, 4th, 5th graders. I didn't have that background. Musical background I had. No problem for me teaching the instruments, but
You're talking the school wasn't a great fit. Teaching at the school?
teaching at those schools.
Yeah.
I was teaching at like 9 schools a week. So
Oh, wow. Yeah. Gotcha.
Actually what I started doing is I started taking nighttime classes to brush up on my code writing. I sort of started playing around with it a little bit again, got a computer and I started doing a little programming and I was like, I can do this actually. Like, I wonder if I got a programming job, I wonder if I could do better financially and have time and energy at the end of the day to make music. That was my thought.
Right.
Because what I realized is that the Paul Effman teaching job, it sapped all my musical energy without giving me any musical satisfaction.
Sure. Isn't that interesting? Yeah.
It was. So
you're doing the computer stuff before it was cool to do the computer stuff. I mean, this is like
you're like ahead of the game
up to Y2K and the Y2K computer bug, and then there was there was sort of the .com stuff all bubbling up, and there was a lot of jobs actually out there.
Mm-hmm.
So I lucked into a job. I didn't luck into it. I took it like a year of classes. Did I already tell you this story?
I don't think so. Right now?
Yeah.
We've
today.
So wrapped up. No, I don't think
Sometimes
so.
I forget. So I took like a year of night school. Went to a little community college in New Rochelle, near where I was teaching and took these classes in programming. And I realized very quickly that I was able to get my skills back. And then I was able to sort of take it further. And so I was like, I think I could actually do this. So actually the biggest risk I ever took was sometime around like April, towards the end of the school year in 97 maybe or 98. I just told my boss, I said, this is going to be my last year. I'm going to find a computer job. But I did not have one yet. This was just because I knew that finding a computer job would be like full-time work.
Sure.
So I just quit teaching, still needing to pay, child support payments without another job. That was the biggest risk I ever took.
Sure. It reminds me of this.
My life.
There's a Zen saying that goes, leap and the net will appear. That may be one of those instances.
I was lucky that it did.
Yeah, for sure.
And the first interview I took, reached out to a headhunter and he sent me on some interviews. And the first interview I took was with a guy named Andy Denler, whose wife is a choral director actually up in Yorktown, I think. And Andy was also a musician. He had studied voice at Fredonia, and he saw something in me, luckily, that even though I had no experience and no computer science degree, this was a little tiny mom and pop company in Westchester, that he saw that I had potential. And he said, we can hire you, but it's going to be at a really low salary. It was probably actually lower than I was making. But I saw that, I could do this and I'll work my way up because I can work my way up much faster in this world than I can in music teaching.
Right. And you never know even where the ceiling is in teaching 3rd through 5th grade or whatever. Or maybe he saw you as being sort of the Thelonious Monk of computer programming, where you had a different viewpoint than maybe some of the other people who are doing the same job. He sensed your creativity in the field, perhaps.
I don't know how he could, but maybe you're right. Maybe he did. Ultimately, I think that it was my ability to be a creative problem solver that helped me in that business, because it was not just my ability to learn the coding things I needed to learn and learn design databases, but be able to sit in a room with like fairly high level business people who said, we have this issue, like we need to have data moved from here to here to here. And there's, like various inputs and outputs and processing and be able to see it and then design a system that could actually do it. That was the tricky part. And I'm sure people get, actually trained in that, but I just had to learn on the job.
Sure. So you're now doing this for a number of years. What was it that compelled you did you just reach your breaking point with computer programming? Was there an epiphany? Did you see the holy light before you that told you to return to the saxophone education, or how did you end up at Ithaca College as the jazz director? I remember your process a little bit, but I don't remember the beginning. I wouldn't have. I didn't know you then.
Yeah, I had been writing code for a while, and I was starting to feel a little stuck in that world. I still played music. I still did some writing. I would write for various things that would come up. I would still play occasionally, but definitely my chops were rusty for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I was really lucky in that I was friends with Nicholas Walker. And Nick Walker and I went way back. We were in middle school together.
Mm-hmm.
We knew each other from middle school and high school.
Yeah. Now, Nicholas Walker exactly. Yeah, go on. I wanted to cover that real quick for the.
Yeah, sure. He was the bass professor at IC, and I had known that he had told me he had this job that he'd gotten up to, and he and I had played together in New York too. Like we had played he was a real go-getter. Like he went over to Tavern on the Green and just basically like brought him demo tapes and said, "Hey, I got a band." He's like, I don't even think he had a band. He was like, "I got a band to play." He wound up with like a bunch of like club dates, at Tavern on the Green. So it was great. I was, getting gigs. And so he was on the faculty, and so he knew about this position before it was advertised. So really the only advantage I think that I had was that I was aware that there was going to be a position.
Mm-hmm.
I think originally he thought that maybe they would be able to just like hire me on his recommendation, and it turned out they had to do an actual search. But I was
Sure.
the lucky part that I had was that I was aware that there might be a position, so I started thinking about it months ahead of time. And then when they actually advertised it, then I was able to say, okay, this is a 1-year position. I got the timing was so lucky. It was that it was only a 1-year job. Steve Brown was previous jazz director, was on his terminal sabbatical. So that meant he was going to retire, but they could only hire it as a 1-year job. So it meant a lot of people wouldn't apply for it who might be looking for full-time jobs.
Mm-hmm.
So I was lucky in that regard. I was lucky that, I had some college teaching in my background, even though those skills were a little old, but I definitely had I had taught at Eastman, I had taught at Florida A&M, I had taught at several schools in New York, I had played Broadway shows. So I had a decent looking resume, even if some of it looked a little stale. I was lucky enough to get an interview. And
Mm-hmm.
what I knew about myself was if I was lucky enough to get an interview, that I was going to nail it. I was going to spend like 2 months basically sitting at my desk at my computer job, not working because I could figure out how to do that, and just planning my interview. And I don't know if you remember. I don't know if you were around. Were you around?
I was. Well,
I was there for the second one. When I showed up, I was at Berkeley for 2 semesters. When I came back, you were there, so I wouldn't have been there for your interview. I was that semester that you probably interviewed. I was at Berkeley, but I saw your second version.
Yeah. So I prepared for that interview like I've never prepared for anything in my life, and I didn't know what they were going to ask. I prepared like 6 lectures. I prepared a recital. I prepared an arranging class, an improv class, a jazz ensemble directing thing. I feel like I wound up doing like 4 out of the 6 things that I had prepared. So definitely there was things I prepared that I didn't, but I was so over prepared for that. I was like, I am going to nail this. They're going to have no choice, but to hire me because I was
sure.
And then I remember distinctly driving away from the interview and just going, I got this.
Well, that's amazing.
Yeah, I think what I felt like was my life's about to change now. Like things are going to change. And fortunately, Catherine and I had Max. He was, she had been teaching at NYU, but she had stopped teaching at NYU, and she was like willing to take the risk to go up to Ithaca for a year and see what happened. And then we just both fell in love with the place. I had to go through the interview process again for the full-time job.
Right. That must have been a little nerve-wracking. I do remember that, but it's got to be tough to defend what has become your own job from other people.
That is not a comfortable place to be.
Sure.
It's not an easy position. I did not always handle myself in a way that was positive or good. I regret some of the ways I handled myself. I definitely found it stressful to try to manage doing my job and at the same time auditioning for my job, because that's what it felt like.
Right. But then you have to, you're not thinking about teaching. Now you're thinking about teaching in sort of a meta, you're thinking about teaching or something. I can imagine it's a mess.
Right. It's like everything I'm doing there, it's not about how I audition. It's like they're taking my entire year's worth of work here.
Sure.
So,
well, you stuck the landing. So there you go. After all that, which brings us in some respects, although we'll fast forward a couple years anyway. I don't want to think about how many years it's been, but we'll fast forward a couple years. So now we find ourselves having to, we talked a little bit, I'm glad we've gotten to a lot of your sort of educational philosophies here. But we find ourselves now having to reconceptualize the way we're approaching teaching jazz music, at least for the next couple months while we're all in quarantine here. I've heard that you're not a big fan of this virus.
How did you hear that? Because I call it the stupid virus in every social media post. No, I'm not a fan.
Yeah, and I thought it was. I think we're gonna. I think we're really going to think about this going forward, because so much of what we do as musicians we take for granted. One of the things that I heard you saying online was that, it's required that we share the same air. I mean, this is part of our job, is you got to be in the same room with people and rehearse and be able to play and practice and everything. And so much of what we do, especially in jazz, I mean, it's different if you're making, hip hop music, or you're doing, electronic music or whatever. Those people have been sitting in their rooms this whole time, which is also great. It's its own thing. But as jazz musicians, it's a very live performance kind of an endeavor, and something like this really screws up the whole operation. But especially, I wanted to get your perspective on this from a college viewpoint, because especially there's got to be so many people that this is their senior year, and they've been going to school for 4 years, and it's their concert or whatever. But how have you been? Let me ask you this: is what have you been doing to try to, or what approaches have you taken, or what angles are you coming from to try to be an effective educator, even despite the fact that maybe the core element of the music is now off the table?
Let me first just say that being in the same air, I should give credit where credit's due. There's a saxophone professor who I greatly admire named David Pope at James Madison University. He's fantastic pedagogue and great saxophonist, both classical and jazz. He's just fantastic. And he's the one who actually said that. And I think he was actually saying that someone else had said it.
It's been passed down through the ages.
Yes. And he was really worried about, like right at the beginning, he was really worried about it. And he talked about just how much he hated, teaching online. I think, okay, so when it first happened, it's interesting because the jazz ensemble, who I spend 4, 5, 6 hours a week with every week, we had just gone through our head chart project where we learned all these tunes by ear.
Mm-hmm. That's a great educational move too.
I love it.
What's the one sentence description of what that is?
Learning the music the way it was meant to be learned.
All right.
By ear. I have the horn in my hand. I play a line. They play it back. It's a bunch of chaos until everyone figures it out. And then we do that for 6 weeks until we got a program.
But you do a whole concert of big band music that every part of the music has been memorized.
Not a music stand is on stage or was ever in the room when we rehearsed it.
And you got to get some credit for the patience required to do something like that. But I think it's important.
I hope everybody enjoys it in the end. And I like the fact that, when you're playing that concert, there's no music stand to hide behind you and the audience. It really is a very visceral kind of process. I love the process. We got to play it with Alexa Tarantino. And then the next week, right before everything closed down, it was March 6th, we went up to Syracuse and played it again with Michael Philip Mossman, the trumpet player. He was the guest soloist there, and we had a great time. We played with him, and he's so nice. And already some students were starting to had canceled, not my students, but some of the high school students at that festival had canceled. And so it was just starting to collapse on itself.
Yeah, I remember that.
So we were together a lot in those couple of weeks as a jazz ensemble, learning all this stuff and really putting it together, and and the frustrations of memorizing stuff, because there's definitely frustrations in what was my part on that again? And what are my notes? And that gets really frustrating sometimes. So when everything got canceled, I just jumped in to a project right away. I was like, okay, there's something that we really should be doing. We should be doing some of these overdubbing things, because I've done this kind of work before. Someone sends me a project in Logic, and I have, a halfway decent mic and a decent thing, interface. And I've recorded parts for other people before this way. It's this is a skill that everybody should have. So let's give it a shot. Mm-hmm. So we did it for 3 weeks or so, 3 or 4 weeks. And I said, and we have a guest artist who we're supposed to play with, Vincent DiMartino, who's a fantastic trumpet player. And he's agreed to participate too. So it basically worked for a while. And I think the reason that we're able to do it at all is because we knew each other, and we had been in the same air, and we had worked together, and we had struggled with, learning these head charts, and everybody knew each other, and I could look at them on a screen just like I can look at you on a screen. And you and I have played together. We've played a bunch of gigs together. We've been creative together. We've eaten meals and been to your wedding. Like we know each other, and that's really meaningful when you make music together.
Sure.
After a certain period of time, the reality of what this would be like to do in September started to set in. And I started worrying that it's one thing to do it like this, like I had a jazz theory class, with like 8 students, and I'm looking at all of them on a Zoom screen. And these are all students that have been in my class for 7 weeks too. And I've worked with them 2 hours a week, and we all know each other, and I know who they are and they know who I am. And I, play piano for them, and we do these little exercises. They're like, hey, remember that thing we did? We're going to do that again. Remember how we did those transcriptions and how we did that analysis? We're going to do that again. And so that was fairly seamless. And, even it wasn't not great, but we can make it work. I'm actually not sure yet. I'm not saying it can't work in the fall, but I'm worried about it. And I think it's at that point that I lost my energy for it, because I lost my energy for it. If there's other reasons, there's other personal reasons that my time availability just evaporated as well. Sure. But I also started realizing, and I think other people started realizing this too. I saw some posts, this drummer, Aaron Stabell in Rochester, who's a friend. We played with Aaron before. And he wrote an interesting blog post about this, I've seen other people write about this too. It's like, how much time was I spending getting wave files from the students and putting them into a project and putting the whole thing together, and then getting them to send me videos, and then putting the videos together and learning how to use Final Cut and putting the whole video together. I enjoyed it for the first couple of weeks. And then after that, I just realized, I'm not sure we're all getting out of this what I'm putting into it. Sure. I'm putting a lot of effort into this. The students are putting a lot of effort, but I'm just not sure. I'm not sure if the audience is getting the thing out of it that we think we are. And then I think as it started, as in the world, I started you see more and more and more and more of these things. And it started feeling like this is just not, it's just not the same anymore.
Sure. Yeah.
So I'm worried. I'm worried about how it's gonna work. I'm not. So the truth is, Bobby, I would like to talk to you again in October, once we've had a chance to sort of reevaluate how this is all working, because I'm not yet sure how we can make it work in an environment where I don't know somebody, or I haven't breathed the same air as them.
Right.
Well, let's do it. I'll hold you to it. In October, we'll see how it all goes. Hopefully, we find out that a mixture of Guinness and Ovaltine just cures it outright, or something like that, and it goes away. But yeah,
I saw something in the paper today that someone suggested the possibility of a 4-10 solution, where as long as nobody was in the building who was high risk, that I don't know the exact. I have to read the article again. It was in the New York Times. It was like you could do 4 days on, 10 days off,
so that everybody who gets it while they're in there has to.
So that basically what you do is you're in class for 4 days. You do you wear masks and everything, and you sort of minimize it. But then you quarantine for the next 10 days, and then you repeat the cycle again. And there was some science.
I'm sure there's all science all over it.
There was science as to why that could work, how that could work. And I could see some possible variant of that working, like, okay, we rehearse for a week, and then we take a week where we do something else, where, okay, you send me a little recording, I check it out, I give you some feedback, and then we meet again in the next week. That could work. There's some variant of that I could see. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed.
Sure.
Well, we'll wrap this up here pretty quick. So I know you gotta appreciate you taking the time. I do think that there's an element too with this music that it's you can have something online and see it, but there's nothing like, and especially I think in jazz and improvised music, being in a room and hearing people invent 1 minute's music in 1 minute's time. I mean, there's no way you can go on Facebook and see there's a live stream and scroll through it in 2 seconds, and whatever. But what I will say is, if there's one thing that's in my mind is a positive on this, is it's going to force us to be creative. It's going to be one of these moments where, limitation breeds creativity, and it is a benefit that all the musicians are learning how to use their recording software, and we're figuring out how to, operate online. And in many ways, we're jazz musicians. I think, we're making a living blowing air through a tube still. A lot of this stuff is pretty old school, so we're not always you yourself excluded, we're not always the most tech savvy people in the world. So this is one of these opportunities to try to figure out how to work around it. But I'm sure that over the next 2 months of meditation on the subject, you will find breakthroughs of ways to deal with it, regardless of how we end up in September.
Yeah, I hope so. Nicholas Walker actually just called me a couple of days ago, and he and I are going to brainstorm. So I know the funny thing is that theoretically, like, this is why we're talking, but the truth is that I don't have the answer yet.
But that may be the answer in itself. Maybe the process is the answer.
Thank you for using my own words against me.
Maybe that's it, man. That's the theme of the conversation. We figured it out.
The process is the product.
That's it.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thanks a lot, Mike. I appreciate you doing this, man.
Bobby, I miss you so much. And
I miss you too.
As soon as this is over, let's make music again.
I'm about it. I'll come up to Ithaca. We'll play some shows for real people in real time. It'll be amazing.
Yeah. Let's do something on the backyard. I so need to do one of our backyard. I don't think you ever got to do one of our backyard potlucks, but it's
no, unfortunately, but I heard about it. I was going to ask you about music because music, but I'll save that for October.
Next time.
Perfect. All right. Well, thanks a lot, Mike.
Absolutely.
Take care, man. I'll talk to you soon. Okay.